the midst of all that is going down at Red Bull, and them eating themselves into oblivion, Checo is sitting pretty. Because there might be a chance for him in 2025 after all. And all of this at the cost of the two biggest contenders for said seat. For those wondering, I'm not against Checo surviving at Red Bull. As far as I'm concerned, he has done the business, and given the team exactly what they have been craving for ever since they started winning world titles back in 2010. Something that they've only just accomplished after all of this success. A clean sweep. First and second in the drivers and the constructors. Checo was the one to do it. And yet at the same time, there's been a lot of questions as to his longevity within Formula 1 and with Red Bull. Many people thinking it's a foregone conclusion that Daniel Ricciardo is going to be getting the seat and that Checo is probably going to be told to go away and maybe most likely retire. But now I'm starting to get the feeling that after all of the stuff that's been going down with Red Bull lately, that kind of thing is something I'm really not wanting to get into right now. The after effects of all of this could be in Checo's favour. I think it is important to note that the good feelings and the goodwill towards Sergio Perez when he arrived at Red Bull in 2021 did kind of expire a fair bit in 2023, with many people questioning why he was even there, that Red Bull should probably just chuck him out mid-season in the same standard as Nick de Vries, who didn't even score a point, and yet Checo had 2 wins under his belt. Let's remember that. He was one of only 3 drivers who won races. But there has been an extra little tidbit kind of clarifying what the situation is for Checo if he wants to stay at Red Bull for another year or so. And quite frankly, it's a breath of fresh air, all of this non-Jos Verstappen drama. So in terms of the terms of his future term with Red Bull, there are no terms seemingly. The long and short of it is that Christian Horner just saw what happened in Bahrain, where Red Bull got a 1-2, and has just basically said, just keep pulling out more results like that and you're good. And you might have a future with Red Bull after all. Which has made things all the more interesting, because once again, many people were just writing off Checo, thinking if he's absolutely lucky, he will see out the season and then go off somewhere else, or maybe go off into retirement. I do personally want Checo to see out his time in Formula 1 on his own terms, instead of being chucked out of a team and then just be left hung and dry, like he almost was in 2020. Remember, that almost happened, and we could have been seeing this perhaps happening again. But all of the stuff that's been going on has sort of made Checo into a bit of a golden light in a way, a guiding light, a sense of calm amongst all of the storm. No one's really worried about Checo, he's just doing his job, and there's no discord around him. He's probably feeling great right now that he's not the center of attention, and that Helmut Marko has been praising him so much. I can understand that you might be thinking, well, hang on a minute, sure, he got second place, but the Mercedes and Ferrari cars were compromised with their own reliability issues, which meant that they weren't going as fast as they could possibly be. If they were running at full pelt, then Sergio might not have gotten second place at the end of the day. That is very true. He might have ended up staying in 5th place where he qualified. And yes, I have predicted for Jeddah that he might not make the top 5, but I could easily be wrong. That's the point of those predictions. But at the end of the day, and in the sake of Formula 1 history, Sergio Perez finished second at the 2024 Bahrain Grand Prix. That's all that matters. He got the 18 points and got Red Bull off to a very strong start. He's in the good books with the likes of Helmut Marko rating his drive in Bahrain as impeccable. And this is a far cry from the Helmut Marko who last year spent most of his time lambasting Checo to the point where the court of public opinion swayed against him so much and everyone was bashing Checo left, right and centre and questioning his skill and whether or not he should even be left out to see out the rest of the season with Red Bull. It was getting crazy to the point where Sergio had to seek counselling. It got that bad. All of this taking place right after Vassapen took Checo's Baku win personally. Then you had all of those fake stories that were going around Reddit about one of the sponsors leaking that Checo was about to announce his retirement at the Mexican Grand Prix, which turned out not to have happened. And then we had all of the stuff at the Mexican Grand Prix, the Suzuka mistake. But then we had a slight resurgence again with a mesmerizing display against Fernando Alonso, and sure, he did not get a podium, but he was able to conduct himself in a very good manner, and he did finish off the season in a relatively stable position. And then, lo and behold, the first race of this season, he gets his best result since Monza last year, which is a very good way to start the year. But I seriously feel that this tonal shift from the special advisor of Red Bull is incredibly surreal. I mean, it's a welcome relief that Helmut's being nice to somebody, and especially it's Sergio Perez, but it's still just really weird. And in the midst of everything else that is going on with the team, and how it's being torn asunder in the wake of the passing of Dietrich Mateschitz, you get the impression that Checo has got a much better time of it. All he has to do is just don't push too hard with the car, keep your head down, keep quiet, don't try any heroics, and just do the job, get some podiums, maybe get some wins if reliability does come back to bite Max's bum, or he gets himself tangled in some kind of accident fighting for position and then he ends up either further down the grid or having to retire. He is there to pick up the pieces. He is there to be the number 2 driver. And whilst he has talked about the idea of going for the world title after Max Verstappen, we do realize that he is not going to be getting that. And I think in a way he does too. And maybe instead he's just got to just do his job. Just get the results quietly. Be consistent. Because if you're consistent, as we saw with the likes of Keke Rosberg in 1982, who went on to win that world title that year, consistency is key. Get some really strong results, and lo and behold, you'll end up being second place in the driver standings, no problem. You might end up being closer to Max than you might have been last year. There's a lot of variables here, and it's looking very good for Checo's mental state. I think he's in a really good position this year. And again, everything that's going down right now, being a really big distraction for Max Verstappen, this is great for Checo because he's got nothing to do with it. About all the stuff that's been going on with upper management and how there's been so much bickering as to who gets to own the spoils of Red Bull in the wake of Mateschitz' death. That is something that I don't think they want to be dealing with, especially when they got 2 other teams which are looking a little bit close for comfort. And then you just get Checo who's just doing his job and not getting involved with it at all. This is something I'm really finding fascinating here, that Sergio is in a really good position to hold on to a Red Bull seat, just by simply being himself. Sergio Perez was an outsider. He was not in the Red Bull fold during his junior campaign. Checo was handed a lifeline in the wake of being dropped by Racing Point as it became Aston Martin in a very conflicting move amongst the court of public opinion. Of course, on one hand, you had Sebastian Vettel arriving at the Silverstone-based team, the biggest signing that base team ever had, with the possible exception of Damon Hill for 1998. But then on the other hand, you were getting rid of one of the most consistent drivers that Silverstone-based team ever had, and was a very big proponent for that team getting 4th place in the Constructors on multiple occasions. And with Red Bull dissatisfied with Alex Albon's performance against Max Verstappen, and them just rejecting another sophomore driver, then Sergio Perez comes in, almost losing his position in Formula 1, and the pantomime villain that Christian Horner is, sees an opportunity to get some good praise amongst the media, provide a lifeline to Sergio Perez, who had done nothing wrong. In fact, he won the Sakir Grand Prix, his first Grand Prix ever for Racing Point, their only win, by the way, and then he gets a chance to drive for a top-tier team. Something that people have been longing to see. Sergio Perez driving for a front-running team and getting the opportunity to get consistent victories. Sure, he had 1 year at McLaren, but we can all agree that 2013 was not a good year for McLaren, and their best days were behind them. And let's be real here, is a bit of a mismatch, especially when you find out that the chance of Fernando being Checo's teammate at Ferrari for 2013 was a little bit of a possibility. Kind of makes you wonder, what would have happened if Checo and Fernando were teammates at one point? That might have worked. But the major musing I have for this video is that all of this going on at Red Bull, wherever it may go, is affecting pretty much everybody involved at Milton Keynes, except for Checo. He had all of that aggravation last year. He was being hounded constantly, every other day. Helmut Marko said something disparaging about him, and then the rest of the world would completely dogpile him and completely send him into a tailspin, which would result in further mistakes on the track, and then all of it would repeat itself, only 10 times worse. So in a way, that Checo came out of the other side of it, and still has a Formula 1 seat, and managed to get second place in the first race of 2024, and did it really quietly and competently. That's a really big win. Checo survived all of that. I think right now, he is unstoppable. I don't think anything can flap him anymore. And right now, with all this going down to the point where Max Verstappen is being irritated by all of these comments and distractions, Checo does not have to get involved, because there's no reason for him to get involved, because he was not built into the Red Bull program from a very young age. He was whipped in from the outside to fill in a gap after Albon, and then he could just spend his time however he wants. And he does have a big following. What is helping him incredibly is that the RB20 is a car that seemingly is agreeable with him. He is pretty happy with that car, much more so than the RB19, which quickly went away from him. And I think that if Sergio just takes one race at a time and reads the situation and just gets those results quietly, do decent in qualifying, and then he's golden. That's all he's got to do. And especially considering that his own teammate does not rate him at all in terms of being a championship contender, nor does he even see him as a driver that could potentially impress this season. The likes of Max Verstappen rating the likes of Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc. He does rate them as potential adversaries or people who will stand out in 2024. Checo was not mentioned, and understandably so given last year. After Miami, Checo was really not getting anywhere near Max Verstappen, not even getting a snifter of a victory. And therefore, why would Max be worried about him? Because, well, he was able to trounce him once, and he would just trounce him again. If you said this to Checo in 2023, that Max did not rate you at all, this would have been a probably demoralizing statement, but in 2024, this is gold dust. Max Verstappen is not looking in your direction. So as long as Checo can just pull in the results quietly and pull a few surprises every now and again with just being quiet and just driver doing his duty, then this could be a pleasant surprise for Red Bull and a welcome salvation of calm. That's what Checo's got to do. So in terms of Christian Horner saying, oh, all he's got to do is just more of what he did in Bahrain, I think the real thing that Checo's got to do is to not cause a stink and get on with his job. If he can do that and sew up second place in the Drivers' Championship much sooner, then I think he's still got it. Because that's what they need right now, Red Bull. They need a stabilizing factor that is not going to rock the boat, not going to cause a stink, and potentially just make things even worse right now when there's a power grab going on between two different contingents of the Red Bull management system. And again, Max is still caught in this firestorm whether he likes it or not. We all know Max Verstappen is a guy who just wants to get on with the racing. If he had it his way, he would get in a time machine and go to the 1960s where he could be racing against the likes of Jim Clark and have a good old time of it, just driving cars and then having some champagne and then going down to a club and maybe a little bit of a tipple at the end of the day. Nice and simple. Simply lovely. But nowadays, Formula One is a little bit more glamorous and gimmicky, which is something that he absolutely detests and will take absolutely any opportunity to disparage. In some ways endearing, and in some ways a little bit, yeah, come on, Max, let's just get on with it. Not disrespecting Max Verstappen, but that's just the way Formula One is right now. And all of this drama going on in the background is probably just getting to Max in some way, in the sense that he's not getting any peace. And we all know that he is unflappable, and many people that give him negative comments, he can just brush them off like water off a duck's back or something like that, but it's probably still quite grating, as it's just not going away. Which makes all of the rumours and possibilities of him going somewhere else, most likely to Mercedes, to partner up with Toto, since Jos has been talking to Toto, not that far-fetched and somewhat plausible. It may not happen, because Red Bull are still doing well, but it's not impossible. Because Lewis going to Ferrari tore up the rulebook, anything's possible now. Then there's something else which I think is going to make Checo's lot all the more cheery. All the stuff that's been going down at VCARB. Sure, Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda, they are two drivers that are tussling potentially for an opportunity to drive alongside Max Verstappen in the RB21. That relationship between Daniel and Yuki has just gotten all the more tense. Now, when they started to work together in 2023, nobody batted an eyelid, since Yuki Tsunoda was a cheeky character, and Daniel Ricciardo was an easygoing fellow who was quite chilled, who really hadn't had any issues with teammates since, well, Max Verstappen himself. Even though he was being battered by Lando Norris, on a social level, they were really good friends, and all the time you see behind-the-scenes content, Lando's always talking about Daniel, so there was some sort of friendship developed, and now that they're no longer teammates, that pressure's gone, they can be really good pals. There was some good connection there. Nobody expected there to be that kind of fractious goings-on with that dive bomb in the cooldown lap, and Yuki almost acting out one of the cardinal sins of Formula One. You do not take out your teammate, especially during the cooldown lap. Since the VCARB 01 had some more RB19 parts and that car is now seriously a good points contender if the stars all align, this has made the reality set in for both drivers that they are fighting for the second Red Bull seat and that they have to outdo one another. And then when you put in team orders, and Yuki had been doing the job, and then Daniel gets called to go and pass him to try and get some points, then it's going to anger the Japanese driver. And it's a real shame to see this happen, since Abu Dhabi was an exemplary act of Yuki's maturity. At one point, he was leading the race, and it was just unfortunate that the strategy fell away from him right at the end, where he might have been able to get some points and maybe get AlphaTauri that 7th place in the Constructors. Although if you do go back to Mexico and he had that tangle with Piastri, that sort of sewed things up that AlphaTauri were destined for 8th and not 7th. They could have gotten a couple of more points, and that might have been enough for them to leapfrog Williams, but, it's history now. But all that good work in 2023 has sort of been undermined by him doing something like that, using his car like that in a petulant move, in a dive bomb, and then suddenly getting all leery with Daniel to the point where it shocks Daniel. I don't think he was seeing that coming. This tension is even worse than Ocon and Gasly last year. Yes, there was an undercurrent of tension with Ocon and Gasly, and they did come together twice, but you can dismiss those incidents as being part of overall chaos that was going on up and down the grid. They were just unfortunate because Australia at the beginning, that was chaos, and then Hungary, that was mad, and Zhou Guanyu did a spot of Zhouling, so they were just bystanders and all of that. But now we've seen this kind of thing for 13th place. Imagine what this will be like when there are points involved, and Yuki either gets told to move over, or there is a genuine battle they are fighting for position. This is going to get dicey. But at the same time, this petulant act is sort of not impressing the higher-ups, and has sort of acted against, and Helmut Marko having a word with him, but in a way sort of being somewhat forgiving, realizing where this anger came from, but this immaturity and these theatrics were not ideal. But regardless, in the midst of all the stuff that's been going on with the Red Bull upper management and Christian Horner and Jos Verstappen and Oliver Mintzlaff, Lauren Mekies, the team principal, now has to deal with the reality that Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda could come to blows. And that's a real shame on your first day in the office, where last year, under Franz Tost, they kept things civil. They're going to have to be really careful with issuing out orders to Yuki or trying to do it in a subtle way. This is just a headache they do not need. Ultimately, I'm rooting for Yuki Tsunoda to get the gig at Red Bull. I really want him to get it and try and prove himself after years of working at AlphaTauri. But even I will admit that this was just not a good way to act. This was not the way to do it, Yuki, and there's something needed to be done here. And if Yuki can't get over this and battle Daniel in a manner which would be expected when working with Max Verstappen, in a mature manner, it's going to make the decision all the more easier for the higher-ups. Unless there's another twist, and then Liam Lawson comes in and swoops the second Red Bull seat, leaving all 3 drivers in the cold. Or, as I've been discussing up until just now, Checo just gets on with the business and simply waltzes to a 2025 seat, or maybe a 1-year extension, who knows? I think Checo should really be looking at all of the discord that's been going on at Red Bull and use it to his advantage. This is an opportunity for him. Just a few months ago, things were looking really uncertain, and Daniel Ricciardo being the hot favourite to get that seat for next year. Now, Checo has a chance. And if Checo can use this to his advantage and boost the morale of the trackside staff, they will be working for him more than ever. Because I'm pretty sure that the trackside staff are really getting sick and tired of all of the stuff that's happened with upper management. They just want to get on with their jobs, but they're being hounded. And if you're working for Red Bull right now and you are working trackside, first of all, I am sorry that you're having to deal with all of this and you're trying to do your job, but I hope that Checo is providing you some sense of comfort, or at least some sense of consistency and non-drama. And this is probably getting on Max's nerves to no end. Checo's doing great right now. If it does get the gig, then Yuki's probably toast at Red Bull. Daniel will probably be stuck in V-car purgatory for another year against Liam Lawson, where we could see Daniel being drubbed similar to Lando. And Sergio can continue to be the bastion of contentment, because Red Bull, they need that right now. So I alluded earlier to the hubbub around Max Verstappen and how a move to Mercedes isn't all that far-fetched. If you're thinking I'm talking absolute bogs dollocks, then I wish to share this video with you right now you can go and watch next. And I assure you, it's not as crazy as you might think.